Okay, I'm going to talk about today a problem that I think should be a problem for all Americans, every 331 million of us. And it's a problem that, in my opinion, is not, and I know a lot of people say this and then they present one that does fit in this category, but I don't think this is a problem of simply left versus right or anything of that nature. I think this is a problem that really does impact all Americans. Now, America, the promise of the United States is supposed to be that it's a republic. It's supposed to be a representative republic, a constitutional republic, under the promise of political representation, which makes laws under which we live. Now, with 331 million of us, there's some question as to whether or not a republic can actually exist on that size and scale. In addition to that, as Congress makes laws, and then the executive or the presidency is supposed to enforce those laws and execute the laws, there becomes this network of a situation where in the executive departments or the executive branch under the presidency, there are these departments created which have become basically dominant in the sense of writing most of the laws, writing most of the regulations, making most of the executive decisions, and even resisting at times the agendas of elected presidents, and have considerable leeway under the Supreme Court. And this is what Jonathan Turley, this article that's a few years old, calls the fourth branch. He begins talking about situation back in the time where President Obama, after some scandal had come out during this time of some of the things going on with State Department, the Justice Department, the Internal Revenue Service. And Obama said, I didn't know about it. And there may be some willful blindness there, as Turley says, but really, how could any one president know what thousands of people are doing in multiple offices and departments who are acting with less and less accountability and more independency over time goes on, even though they're technically under the direction of the presidency. In addition to that, Congress, with its 435 representatives and 100 senators, cannot provide effective oversight of these thousands of bureaucrats working in the various departments under the executive branch. And so this fourth branch becomes sort of the real government of the United States in a very real way. So Obama said he didn't know about these things, or a scandal had come out in these departments, and the heads of these agencies even claimed that they didn't know anything about major decisions that were being made by their subordinates. But Turley argues, besides willful blindness, he says that the suggestion that someone, even the president, is in control of today's government may be an illusion. Therefore, it has moved from, in my opinion, a republic, or even if it wasn't fully a republic in the sense of in terms of its size and scale, it moved from the promise of a republic to an administrative state, a state in which the people who are making the laws and regulations, that are executing the law, that are making the major decisions, are not people who have been elected and represent the people and are not accountable to them in any way, shape, or form. This is within the federal government itself, not just between the issue of federalism between the states and the federal government, the growing dominance of the federal government, but this is within the federal government itself. This growing area of executive agencies has continued to expand, thereby bringing about the limitation of the power of the legitimate constitutional three branches. And so he says the rise of the fourth branch, he explains here, defines the fourth branch. He says the rise of the fourth branch is an administrative state of sprawling departments and agencies that govern with increasing autonomy and decreasing transparency. This is how it works. Congress writes laws. The president is supposed to enforce these laws. And as the laws become more and more vague, Congress isn't totally without blame here. And the presidency, over time, creates more and more departments and then fills those departments with bureaucrats, career politicians who are, doesn't mean they're bad people necessarily, or that there's anything wrong with them. They're just people doing a job, but they have no way of being responsive, even if they wanted to the people for whom they write laws and regulations. And so these departments get created, and now it's a situation, as far as the president is concerned, where these departments and agencies are there before a president arrives. They're there while a president is there, even at times resisting or attempting to control the political agenda of presidents. And then they're there after the president leaves, and they continue to expand and increase in their power, to the extent where even presidents like Obama and Trump experienced internal resistance in regard to these agencies and the furtherance of their agendas. So the fourth branch is an administrative state of sprawling departments and agencies that govern with increasing autonomy, meaning they are a law unto themselves, and decreasing transparency. Even if Congress, the presidency, and the Supreme Court wanted to provide oversight of these, just sheer numbers would not allow them to do it. There's only 535 in Congress, there's one president, and there's 9 people on the Supreme Court. So they couldn't effectively watch over this fourth branch and its decisions. Therefore, it becomes more and more autonomous, more and more independent, even though it is not a legitimate constitutional branch of the government. Around 1790, just to put these things in perspective, Turley explains that there were about 1,000 non-military workers, meaning they weren't in the military, they were part of the execution of the law under the executive department. By 1962, there were 2.5 million, 2,515,000. Around today, which Turley wrote this in 2013, said that there were 2.8 million, 2,840,000 federal workers, 15 departments, 69 agencies, and 383 non-military sub-agencies. Explains this exponential growth has led to increasing power and independence for agencies. And he refers to this as a shift of authority, that away from the 3 constitutional branches, whatever their problems may be, that they are the ones that are legitimate in the sense that they are intended by the law. There has been a shift to this non-constitutional fourth branch that does not and cannot represent the people, that cannot be voted in or out, that cannot be held accountable in any meaningful way by people, and cannot be held accountable by any meaningful means through the federal government. It could, but it's very rare, and it's becoming more and more independent, even coercing the federal government. Says that and he says that the fourth branch actually now has a larger practical impact on the lives of the citizens than all the other branches combined. Whoever's in Congress, the presidency, or the Supreme Court. It's not to say that they don't have an impact on our lives, but these people in the fourth branch, in these departments, are writing the laws, they are writing the regulations that affect most Americans. Talking about Congress, threat to Congress's lawmaking authority. The vast majority of laws, quote unquote, governing the United States are no longer passed by Congress, but are the result of regulations. So it is not Congress who's writing most of the laws, it's these unelected bureaucrats in the fourth branch. Thousands of unnamed, unreachable bureaucrats, according to Turley. In 2007, Congress enacted about 138 public laws, while federal agencies finalized 2,926 rules and 61 major regulations. So these are the laws to which Americans are being held accountable, but they have no recourse to hold their government accountable. Again, he talks here about what I've just said, little accountability, and even if we wanted to, who would we blame? the way that these regulations are crafted are within offices with many people working on different aspects of this to craft something so that it's not really proper to say anyone in particular is to blame. But if that is the case, who do we hold accountable when something goes wrong? Also, a threat to the Supreme Court. Agencies are entitled to heavy deference in their interpretation of the laws. They determine their own districts. And even under the judiciary, which is broader than the Supreme Court, there's other federal courts. Under the United States Constitution, we're entitled to due process. But under these administrative courts, the standard for due process is much, much lower. So even if Congress decided to relieve the judiciary, or at one point the Congress did decide to relieve the judiciary of most regulatory cases, and this allowed the fourth branch to create administrative courts tied to individual agencies. So these agencies not only get to write the laws, but when their laws run afoul of someone who is in a legal situation with this agency, these agencies get to create their own courts in which they get to judge whether or not their agency was in the right or wrong. And people are 10 times more likely to be charged by one of these federal courts than to actually appear before a US federal court. They hear way more cases. Federal judges heard about 95,000 cases in a year. Federal agencies hear about 939,000. So they are deciding many more cases. Often called, as Turley calls them, mockeries of due process, meaning they are the judge in their own cause, and lo and behold, they judge themselves to be right. They're also a threat to presidential powers. This goes along with the increase of the imperial presidency and the growth of the power of the modern presidency anyway. So the presidency, nor is Congress, nor is the Supreme Court blameless in this, but the presidency is one example of seeing an increased amount of power in one branch in which transparency has declined. But this branch has even become, the fourth branch has even though it's a creature of the executive, has become more and more independent from the executive. These agencies, Turley writes, have evolved into largely independent entities over which the president has very limited control. So this is what people talk about, it sounds like a conspiracy theory, the deep state. This is a government of political elites who can work with little to no transparency and accountability from the elected part of the government and form an administrative state that writes most of the laws, makes most of the executive decisions, even resisting resisting elected presidents, and decide hundreds of thousands more cases than the Supreme Court. And in this sense, this is our true government. So Turley goes on and says some agencies have gone so far as to refuse to comply with presidential orders. So if you can refuse to go along with the elected branches of the government to whom you are supposed to be accountable, then it brings into question who is really in charge, who is ultimately the government. Talks about the marginalization of Congress feels is magnified for citizens. So if Congress feels like the fourth branch is out of control and that they have no way of bringing them into accountability, imagine how us 331 million Americans must feel. And if you are an American listening to this, you may never have heard this. You may never have heard of the fourth branch, as most Americans have not. But if you do feel the sense that you do not have a true voice in your government, that your government is not truly responsive to you, it's really just political elites acting in their own self-interest, and you get this sense that that is the case with the US government, this is probably one of the reasons why. Because we don't have any control over this. This is not an aspect of government over which we can do anything about. So it says the marginalization of Congress feels is magnified for citizens who are routinely pulled into a vortex of an administrative state that allows little challenge or appeal. Meaning this government has become a self-justifying end in itself. It is not there to serve the people. It is there to serve its own budget, its own interests, what it thinks is best. And even if there are good people in there who want to help Americans, as many of these bureaucrats are, they have no way of really knowing whether or not their actions are effective or ineffective, or the unintended consequences they might cause. Plus, these agencies often get to be the judge in their own cause. Plus, there's no market signals, nor are there any political signals, like someone getting voted out. There's no way to reach or communicate effectively with this government. And this is a serious problem for all Americans. Goes on to say in conclusion, these agencies effectively run the show. The rise of the fourth branch represents the single greatest change in our system since the founding. So if you get the sense that we're not in control of today's US government, if you get the sense that even the three constitutional branches, for all their problems and the critiques we might make of them, that they're not in charge either, you're right. And the American government, this being the case, arguably has shifted from the promise of a constitutional republic to simply an administrative state with political elites serving their own interests in name of serving the people.